Welcome back. Today's story is about a long-haul flight, an expensive seat upgrade, and a mother who absolutely refuses to accept that no is a complete sentence. This story from AmITheAsshole got over 15,000 upvotes and completely divided the community. Stay tuned, because things get absolutely wild at the end. Our protagonist, let's call him Jake, is a 28-year-old software developer. He flies regularly for business, but this time is different. After finishing an exhausting project, he's rewarded himself with an upgrade to a premium economy seat with extra legroom for a 10-hour flight from New York to London. Jake paid an extra $250 for this seat. Not cheap, but after 3 months of overtime and weekend shifts, he told himself, "I deserve this." Besides, Jake is 6'5" in a regular economy seat. His knees are practically touching the chin of the person in front of him. On the day of the flight, Jake arrives at the airport early, checks in without stress, and looks forward to 10 hours where he can actually stretch his legs. Maybe watch a few movies, read a book, just relax. Boarding goes smoothly. Jake finds his seat, 12A, window seat, premium economy, exactly as booked. He stows his carry-on in the overhead bin, settles into his seat, and takes a deep breath. The seat is comfortable, there's actually space for his legs, and he's already feeling the stress of the past weeks melting away. He puts on his noise-canceling headphones, pulls out his Kindle, and thinks to himself, this was worth every penny. But then, the peace doesn't last long. About 15 minutes into boarding, Jake notices a woman making her way down the aisle. She's carrying a toddler, maybe 2 years old, who's already fussy and whining. Behind her trails a man with 2 more kids, probably around 5 and 7 years old. Jake doesn't think much of it. Families fly. Kids cry. That's life. He's got his noise-canceling headphones, so he's not worried. But then the woman stops right at his row. She looks at her boarding passes, then at the seats behind Jake, regular economy, then back at Jake's premium seat. The woman leans over and taps Jake on the shoulder. He removes one headphone and looks up with a polite smile. "Yes?" he asks. The woman smiles back, but there's something expectant about it. "Hi," she says brightly. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to switch seats with me. I'm back in 25C with my family, and I'd really like to sit with my baby here in premium economy where there's more space for us." Jake is caught off guard for a moment. He glances at the toddler, who's now pulling at his mother's hair and whining louder. Then he looks back at the woman and says, as politely as he can, "I appreciate you asking, but I specifically paid extra for this seat because I need the legroom. I'm sorry, I can't switch." Now, a reasonable person would say, "Okay, no problem," and move on. But this woman? She doesn't move. Instead, her smile freezes on her face. "Oh," she says, with a slight edge to her voice. "But I have a baby. Don't you think a mother with a baby needs the space more than a single person?" Jake feels his stomach drop. He knows where this is going. He's heard stories about situations like this. He keeps his voice calm and says, "I understand that traveling with kids is difficult, but I paid for this seat specifically. I'm 6'5" and I can't physically fit comfortably in a regular economy seat. I'm really sorry, but the answer is no." The woman's face hardens. "That's incredibly selfish," she says, loud enough that other passengers are now turning to look. "You're really going to make a mother hold a crying baby for 10 hours in a cramped seat when you could easily just move back there? What kind of person does that?" Jake feels every eye in the surrounding rows on him. He's starting to sweat. The woman continues, "My husband is sitting separately from us because we couldn't afford to book our whole family in premium. If you switch with him, at least I could have space with my baby. You'd still be in economy, just a few rows back. What's the big deal?" Jake notices that the husband looks embarrassed and is trying to quiet the older kids, who are now also staring. But the wife is not backing down. Jake takes a breath and says, more firmly this time, "I understand your situation, but I'm not switching seats. I paid for this specific seat, and I'm keeping it. I'm sorry you're in a difficult position, but that's not my responsibility." And that's when she really loses it. "You're a horrible person," she practically shouts. "How can you be so heartless? Look at my baby. She's going to cry the entire flight because of you. Everyone on this plane is going to suffer because you're too selfish to give up one seat." Now the entire premium economy section is watching. Some people are whispering to each other. Jake can see a mix of reactions. Some people look sympathetic to the mother. Others are shaking their heads at her behavior. An older gentleman across the aisle even mutters "good for you" to Jake, but quietly enough that the woman doesn't hear. Jake is done with this conversation. He puts his headphone back on and deliberately looks out the window, making it clear he's not engaging anymore. But the woman doesn't leave. She's just standing there in the aisle, holding her now screaming toddler, blocking other passengers from getting to their seats. Finally, a flight attendant appears. She's young, probably in her mid-20s, and she looks stressed. "Ma'am, you need to take your seat. We can't delay the flight." The woman immediately pivots to the flight attendant. "This man is refusing to switch seats with me even though I have a baby who needs the extra space. Can't you do something?" The flight attendant glances at Jake, who simply says, "I paid for this seat." The flight attendant nods and turns back to the mother. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but if he paid for that seat, we can't force him to move. You'll need to return to your assigned seat." The woman's face goes from red to purple. "This is discrimination against families. I'm going to report this airline. You're all horrible people." She finally storms off toward the back of the plane, and Jake can hear her complaining loudly to anyone who will listen for the next 10 minutes. The plane finally takes off. Jake tries to settle back into his book, but he can't concentrate. He keeps replaying the confrontation in his head. Was he wrong? Should he have just switched? The woman's words keep echoing. "You're a horrible person. Everyone's going to suffer because of you." About an hour into the flight attendant comes by with drinks. When she reaches Jake, she leans in and quietly says, "Don't worry about earlier. You did nothing wrong. She tried the same thing with 3 other people before you. The airline doesn't give free upgrades just because someone has kids." Jake feels a wave of relief, but also anger. So this woman had been working her way through premium economy, trying to guilt-trip people into giving up their paid seats? The flight attendant continues. "Between you and me, she's already complained to 2 other crew members trying to get a free upgrade. We've seen it all before." Jake nods and thanks her. He tries to enjoy the rest of his flight, and mostly succeeds. But every time he hears a baby cry from the back of the plane, and yes, that toddler cried a lot, he feels a pang of guilt. Not because he thinks he was wrong, but because society has conditioned him to feel like he should always sacrifice for mothers and children. The flight lands in London. As Jake is collecting his bag from the overhead bin, the older gentleman from across the aisle catches his attention. "Good on you for standing your ground, son. I'm a father of 4, and I would never expect a stranger to give up something they paid for." That woman was out of line. Jake thanks him and heads off the plane. As he's walking through the terminal, he can't shake the feeling that maybe he was wrong. Maybe he should have been more compassionate. Maybe $250 and some legroom wasn't worth making a mother's flight miserable. So that night, unable to sleep in his hotel room, Jake does what millions of people do when they need validation. He posts his story. Jake's post blows up. Within 6 hours, it has 15,000 upvotes and over 3,000 comments. The verdict? An overwhelming NTA, not the asshole. Let's look at some of the top comments. Top comment, with 12,000 upvotes. NTA. You paid for that seat. Her poor planning is not your emergency. Being a parent doesn't entitle you to other people's paid services. I say this as a mother of 3. Another highly upvoted comment. NTA, and honestly, good for you for not caving to the pressure. These people rely on public shaming to get what they want. If she wanted premium economy, she should have paid for it like everyone else. Her kids, her responsibility. But not everyone agreed. A heavily downvoted comment reads, YTA, you could have shown some basic human compassion. A few hours of discomfort for you versus 10 hours of hell for that mother. Sometimes being technically right isn't the same as being a good person. This comment sparked a huge debate in the replies. One person responded, compassion is a two-way street. Where was her compassion for Jake, who spent his hard-earned money on comfort he specifically needed? Why is his comfort less important than hers? Another person chimed in. As a flight attendant, I see this constantly. Parents who think having kids means everyone else should accommodate them. If you can't afford to travel comfortably with your children, maybe don't take that trip or accept the discomfort as part of your choice to fly economy. A particularly insightful comment read, the real villain here isn't Jake, and it isn't even the mother. It's the airline industry that makes flying so miserable that we're all fighting over scraps of basic human dignity like legroom. That comment got a lot of support. People started sharing their own horror stories about shrinking airline seats, ridiculous fees, and the way airlines pit passengers against each other instead of just providing decent service. But back to Jake's specific situation. The overwhelming majority agreed. He was not the asshole. He paid for his seat. He had legitimate physical needs. The woman had options. She could have paid for premium economy if it was that important, or she could have planned better. One comment that really resonated with Jake said, "The fact that you even questioned whether you were wrong shows you're a good person. But being a good person doesn't mean being a doormat. You're allowed to keep things you paid for." 2 days later, Jake posted an update. He thanked everyone for their perspectives and said the overwhelming NTA verdict helped him let go of the guilt. He also added an interesting detail. He later learned from a colleague who was on the same flight that the woman and her family were flying to London for a vacation. Not an emergency, not a funeral, just a leisure trip. This detail made a lot of commenters even more firm in their judgment. As one person put it, "So she chose to take her family on an international vacation she couldn't afford to be comfortable on, and then tried to make that everyone else's problem? Absolutely not." Jake's story touched a nerve because so many people have been in similar situations, pressured to give up something they paid for or worked for because someone else claims to need it more. And while compassion is important, so is respecting boundaries and personal property. So what do you think? Was Jake right to keep his seat? Or should he have shown more compassion to the struggling mother? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new Am I Wrong stories 3 times a week. See you in the next one.